Hello. So to answer the first part of this assignment, I do know someone who is a good listener. Two people, my parents, when they speak to each other, and I've noticed this on multiple occasions. Um, they both listen intently in retrospect to how I listen, but they both listen intently to the point where if anyone tried to even intervene within their conversation, they would still be like glued to the other person that is speaking. And it doesn't even have to be them speaking to each other, just anybody that is speaking, even if I'm speaking to them. They listen to the point where, like, you can just tell that they're waiting for the next word that is coming out of your mouth. It doesn't matter if the conversation is light or if it's a heavy conversation. They always listen to the point where you know that they're paying attention. So, what I mean by that and how I know that is the nonverbal gestures that they make when another person is speaking. Like, I do this, of course, as well, but I know, like, they nod along, they even communicate, like mid conversation, one of them will make a comment and then they'll even stop mid conversation to conversate about that person's comment because they care that much about the other person's opinion, if that makes sense. So I wish I knew other people who listen to the point where like they care about every single thing that comes out of someone's mouth, but I only know my parents that do that, and I don't even do that all the time. So yeah. So what I think about people who are good listeners like my parents is obviously I envy them, and I think they're just beyond amazing for like being so focused as a person and being so involved in someone's conversation to the point where like you let the other person know that what they're saying means a lot to you, even if it's not even like a big deal. And in retrospect to people who are bad listeners, I think bad listeners, I guess I do treat my relationships with people in my life who are bad listeners differently. I think I don't really like to speak to people who are bad listeners, if that makes sense, because I know that they're not paying attention. An example of this would be a family member that I actually fell out with about a year ago. And a big reason for our relationship coming to an end is because every time you would speak to this individual, or I spoke to this individual, they would never listen to what you had to say. And it was not even a one-time thing. It was the majority of the time. They would just do what was best for them. And you could never voice your opinion with them, because if you even try to, they wouldn't listen at all. It's like they turned the switch off in their head, and they're like, what I think is right, and like what I want to do is what I want to do. So whatever you have to say, I don't care about, Or even when I try to, talk about my day or like voice what was going on in my life that was really important to me, they would never listen. So I guess that answers the question of if I treat people who are good listeners and bad listeners differently, and it's a yes, because if you're not a good listener and I'm trying to tell you something important to me, or even if it's just, like a normal basic conversation, and you're just like not listening to what I have to say, I feel like you don't deem me important, or you don't respect me and respect my, opinions and just me as a person. So why would I communicate with someone or even be involved with someone that just doesn't care about me? It's not normal, and I wouldn't do that to myself. So, and this ties into one of the points that were made in the lecture of egocentrism, and this is a very good example of egocentrism is how my family member treated me in that relationship, where they would only want to hear what they deemed correct or what they deemed important, and they would just zone out everything else that anyone else had to say. And you know, people say, oh, I'll change, I'll do better, but you know, it's just how they are, and you can't change a person's listening skills because it's something that they have to work on their own. So yeah. To answer the third question about a time where I was a good listener and how it impacted me, importantly, would actually be recently when I had a conversation with my boyfriend about something that was important to him. And my role in the communicating process wasn't even, it was like 95% listening and 5% communicating, because what he had to say, he just needed someone that would like be a sponge that just soaked up all his information, and that's what I did. And then make little commentary along the way that made him know that, like, you know, I was listening and I was 100% involved in what he was saying. And then at the end of what he had to say, I would voice my opinion. And that's just what he needed, you know. He just needed someone that would listen to what he had to say and then back him up on his viewpoint. Because when you're talking to someone about something you think is important, you want the person receiving the message to also deem it as important as well. So that's what I did for him, and in return he even thanked me for it and said, thank you for being there for me and being someone I can vent to. And he appreciated my opinion in return and even took it into account later on. So I guess, of course, being a good listener, you aren't born with it, but it is developed over time. And it's not hard for anyone to practice being a good listener. All you have to do is listen when someone is talking to you and pay attention to the conversations that you're making with people. So, and one of the things I found important in the lecture was one of the points made on benefits of being a good listener. And one of them was an example of nursing, which is what I'm going into. Being a better listener, you can get more information about your patient and you can make a better diagnosis. And obviously this is a given, but it's very true that being a good listener is as important as being a good communicator, because the more you listen, the more you can take into account in your profession or even in a relationship, in your everyday life. And that's very interesting to me. To answer the second part of the assignment about the TED Talk, I found some things very interesting. And one of the points he made about becoming a better listener is taking at least 3 minutes out of your day to be in complete silence or quiet. And I honestly found myself doing this without even realizing it. But sometimes it's when I wake up in the middle of the day or before I go to bed. But I'll just sit there in silence where the room around me is silent, but my head or my brain will be going through what I did that day and reflecting on what was good and bad. And I think this is important for like self-evaluation or self-love, being comfortable alone, you know. So yeah, I thought that was very interesting. Also, after reading How to Master the Art of Listening, I found some things very interesting. I did not know that you could listen at a rate of up to 450 words per minute, but the average person only speaks 125 to 175 words. And this actually makes a lot of sense, because sometimes I even catch myself like waiting for the person to like say the next thing because they're speaking too slowly. And in my head, I just thought that like some people just communicate slowly or like slower than how I communicate, because I find myself talking very fast, but maybe to other people I actually talk slower. Even in this article, it mentions that being a good listener is not easy. No one is born being a good listener, and they even make a bunch of viewpoints on this argument because it's true. But they also say the good news is anyone can learn to become a better listener. And it's true, anyone can learn, but it is your choice to learn it or not. Some people can go their whole lives not wanting to be a good listener, and it's because they don't want to be. You can't force anyone to. You can't just wake up one morning and be like, okay, I'm going to be a good listener now. No, you have to practice this, maneuver it, and, you know, challenge yourself with it over time. You know, that's how everyone learns anything. So yeah. I also found 2 points of the section of what makes a good listener very interesting and true, actually, is when they said they listen with the intent to understand, not the intent to respond. Going back to my parents, this is exactly how they are, and it's also one of the other points as well, but they listen with the intent to understand, not in the intent to respond. They listen with the intent to take into account what the person has to say instead of what they have to say in return. You know what I mean? Like, they're not forced to even say anything back, but as long as they're paying attention to the conversation and listening to the other person, it makes a good listener. And the other point is you make the other person feel heard. And I feel like I keep repeating this, but it's so true that when you're talking to someone, you want them, and even in this article, I said all of that before even reading this, and it's so true, and I'm glad that I'm not the only one that thinks so, because part of listening is making others feel like you're listening. So it says lack of eye contact during a conversation makes listeners seem insincere. And I even mentioned that before, is when you're talking to someone, you want them to focus on you, the words coming out of your mouth, the eye contact you're making with them. It makes the conversation flow better. It makes what you're saying feel heard. It just makes the whole thing better, and the person receiving the message, that they're also a good listener. So even in here it says, what's more surprising is that your level of attentiveness can affect how the speaker talks. And this is so true. I once had to do a presentation for a class where I knew no one was paying attention. Like, I just knew it. It was such a random topic and no one really even cared about it. So the way I presented the presentation, I just knew I did not do good. I just read straight from the PowerPoint and I just didn't even look at the class. I was like, la 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 la, and like, it was so bad. And even the teacher didn't care because obviously I got 100 for it. But yes, it is true that the level of attentiveness can affect how the speaker talks in any conversation. So overall, like I've mentioned before, although being a good listener is not something that anyone is born with, it is something that you can learn and practice over time, because listening is just as important as communicating and speaking to someone, and you need it. Like, it's a necessity in life, in anything you do, in any profession, conversation, anything at all, like when you're conversing to anyone at all. So it's very important to practice it, maneuver it, and take it into account, like be a good, pay attention to whoever's talking to you. If not, you're not respecting them and they can feel it as well. So yeah.